I'm so curious, I know it's National Neighbor Day today. In the last year, what kind of growth and trends have you seen in terms of how neighbors are now using the platform?
Well, thank you, Emily, and happy National Neighbors Day. This actually kicks off a whole month of celebration for us. So we're quite excited to get neighbors posting on the platform all about why they love why hashtag you love your neighborhood. But in terms of what we're learning, you're dead on. People are absolutely much more attuned to local. The survey we just released shows that 61% of people say that neighborhood is the place they want to build community. 72% want to support a local business, who doesn't? And 58% say they have a renewed appreciation for their neighborhood as they are doing much more work from home, for example.
You're in 11 countries. Tell us about how what you're seeing in the U.S. compares to how neighbors in other parts of the world are turning to Nextdoor.
So frankly, there's just a lot more similarities than differences. We are in 11 countries, but as I look across the globe, actually in anticipation of kicking off Neighbor Month, we've been doing some really good neighbor awards in Australia, in the UK, and in the Netherlands. And the stories are very similar about how people have come together to give and to get help. We know that during the pandemic in particular, people really looked to those that were nearby them. There was tremendous power in proximity, but it's the same wherever you go. Australia's hopefully about to come out of a pretty gnarly lockdown. And so those neighbors have been keeping each other cheerful. They have been making sure the elderly, those that might be more immunocompromised, are being looked after. If you look at a country like the UK, much more focused on local business right now, but nevertheless, the trends are much more similar than different, which is great to hear for all of us who care about the neighborhood.
The FBI here in the U.S. just came out with some new and startling statistics about crime in 2020, saying property crime is down, violent crime is up, murder is way up, almost 30%. And I'm curious if you're seeing any data on the platform that adds additional context to those numbers.
We're definitely not seeing a lot that would suggest there's more crime, broadly speaking. We do know that safety is an important part of any neighborhood, and neighbors will often use Nextdoor in order to make sure that they are feeling safe. Package thefts, for example, would come on that list. More broadly, I think what we are seeing in terms of trends are more neighbors are moving. About 1 in 3 on the platform actually moved last year. We're definitely seeing that they're moving out of urban areas into suburban areas. I think that's much more about quality of life, access to green spaces, maybe less about security that you're asking about. And of course, we know that neighbors are doing more around their homes. So those are more the types of trends that we are picking up on. It does mean there are brands that are endemic to the platform that might be around things like home services and home security that do very well, but nothing as extreme as those FBI stats. Very sorry to hear those, in fact.
Right. Well, you know, staying on the crime beat for just another moment, the Gabby Petito case has taken the U.S. by storm, and her parents have thanked folks on social media for helping to advance the case. You know, I'm curious, you know, when it comes to Nextdoor, there's been this sort of concern about the rise of digital vigilantism. And what's your take on that, given that, you know, certainly there can be positive results, but the pendulum can also swing in the wrong direction?
Yeah, it's something you have to take incredibly serious. And I always say Nextdoor was founded on trust, right? It begins with real people at a real address. So a lot of the trolling that you might see on other platforms, it's much harder to do when you're that real person and you might actually show up in the local coffee shop right next to them. So people are on better behavior. We're a guideline-driven platform. One of the things we instigated over the last year was the Good Neighbor Pledge, so that as you join, or if you hadn't gone through it, you're reminded to be helpful, to be respectful, not to discriminate. Of course, there's lots of places we can use technology to slow people down. We did this with Kindness Reminder that I've talked to you about before, but more recently we have launched things like an anti-racism reminder. We've used it for COVID-19 misinformation reminders. We also want to make sure that overall, if someone does report, that it's going not just to the neighbors in the neighborhood that might review, but it can come into a Nextdoor reviewer as well. That neighborhood team that I just talked about, incredibly important for local context. And I'm really happy to say that that team has gotten much bigger over the last couple of years. And in fact, we just launched a team member called the Welcome Team Member to actually welcome neighbors to the neighborhood. And I think that's all about setting the right tone.
Last quick question. You just had your investor day. You've got a SPAC coming up. When's that going to happen and how big is it going to be?
Sure. So as you know, we announced our SPAC in early July timeframe. We're now in the de-SPAC process. We had a great investor day last week. We actually raised our guidance, raised revenue growth rate this year to 47% from 44%. And for next year, 40% growth again. So hyper growth platform at scale. In terms of when we de-SPAC, we're continuing to move through our SEC process. We're feeling really upbeat about it at the moment, and watch the space for when the ticker KIND will finally be ready to go on the New York Stock Exchange.